Why did Khrushchev put missiles in Cuba? Well, you're going to need more than 1 point to write about if you're going to do this in an exam. So the first reason that he put missiles in Cuba that you could mention, of course we don't know for definite why, so we'd have to ask Khrushchev himself, but the first reason historians put forward is that Khrushchev was genuinely worried that the United States were going to invade and overthrow the Cuban Revolution. There was only one way he was really going to stop that, and that was by placing nuclear weapons in Cuba so that America couldn't invade Cuba. So as soon as Cuba gets nuclear warheads, it's a no-go zone because they can launch those nuclear bombs at America. So it was, and this was what Khrushchev actually went on to say during the war. It was a defensive measure to protect Cuba against the United States. And if you're writing that in your exam, you should also write about the Bay of Pigs incident, which, of course, was an American... the Americans gave arms to Cuban exiles to invade Cuba to try to overthrow the Cuban Revolution. Now, that was a disaster, but it seemed to show Khrushchev and the world that the United States wanted to overthrow Castro. So, 1, a defensive measure. 2, Khrushchev put the missiles in Cuba, another thing you could mention, in response to the fact that America had missiles in Europe close to the Soviet Union. For example, Turkey and Italy, which was nearby or close enough to Russia to be able to hit the key cities, the most important cities in the Soviet Union. So it was and this is the word you would use, a countermeasure. That's the word that you'd use there. Another thing, I'd probably stick with those first two, but another thing you could write is that the Soviet Union was behind in the arms race. It was the Americans had far more nuclear missiles and far more long-range nuclear missiles than the Soviets did, so putting missiles in Cuba would help to address that balance, because Cuba was such a really good strategic place for the Soviets to have missiles, because it's so close to the United States border. So there's 3 things that you could write, but I'd mostly probably write a defensive measure to counter the threat of an American invasion of Cuba, and secondly, as a countermeasure, because the Americans had missiles in Italy and Turkey and other places in Western Europe which were close to the Soviet Union. There we go.